anybody hear me? Or see me? I think you can see me. The frame's a bit of a disaster. My assistant wasn't here today, although I see she's in the chat. So yeah, it's been a bit chaotic. I haven't even got a beer today, so this is how grim it's become. Can you hear me okay? If I go like that, do the hands move? There's a few technical things. For some reason my camera on the keys has got a load of kind of writing on it, but yeah, inexplicable things. I have no beer, I've got some water today. To kind of fit with the seriousness of the topic, I wanted to talk and play a bit about free improvisation. So I guess, what is it? How do you do it? Why do you do it? Who is it who does it? So basically, free improvisation is the same as improvisation. Everybody's free to make up whatever they want to make up, and if you make something up and you write it down on a piece of paper, then it's a composition, or if you record it, or if you... So there are lots of different ways of making things up, and I wanted to talk about one which isn't really talked about that much, because there's no real single method. If you want to learn how to play jazz, there seems to be a consensus that there's a kind of a method to do it. I mean, I'm not sure if I agree with that, but there's a method that will get you somewhere. Free improvisation is interesting because if you're playing with people, somebody who's never played an instrument before can come and play something, and you can make it sound good, and for that moment that person is a good musician. A friend of mine, a pianist, did a composition class where he brought a recording of one of his compositions to the class, got the students to analyse it, analyse the notes, the intention of the music, what they thought was behind the music, and then he played them a video of it, and it was him with his 1-year-old daughter playing the keys and him using the sustain pedal. So yeah, that made me think, that story. It was told to me as part of a kind of online workshop that I was doing about improvisation, and then I did another one the other day, and so I thought it would be good to talk a little bit about it, because if I played Duran Duran songs or Kylie Minogue songs or Renaissance pieces written for clavichord or something like that, it's basically, the way that I treat it is using free improvisation more than it is using jazz improvisation, which most of the time is based around quite a specific thing. I wrote a load of notes down about what I was going to talk about as if it was like, this is GCSE music free improvisation class. Yeah, so hello first of all. I went straight in with the rant and didn't say hello to people. So I don't know how many people are here because I don't have an assistant, but I see there are some familiar faces, which is great, and it's good to be back, and feels just as weird as ever talking to this thing, but here I am. So yeah, I think the essence of what I want to talk about is the idea that when you improvise or when you listen to music, what you hear as music it depends on where you put the frame, like with visual art. So you can put a frame around something that is something that you see that just happens in nature. For instance, hello Guy, hello everybody, and you put a frame around that and it can look like a painting, and some people would say it is a painting, and some people would say it doesn't matter if it's a painting or not, but the essential thing is that the frame makes you look at what is happening in a different way. And I think the way that I got into free improvisation was thinking about that. I ran out of things in jazz that I liked enough that I could just play jazz and nothing else. Some of those things have come back now, but jazz always leads to a lot of other music. It led me back to liking Bach, and it led me into liking John Cage, and led me into liking Japanese music, and it even led me back into liking a lot of pop music. So I'm going to start. I'm just going to play a bit first, and I guess what I'm going to be talking about a lot is having various limitations. So that's the other thing. Free improvisation, free composition, free anything is just based on how you work around a limitation, but you decide what the limitation is. Maybe you don't know what it is until you start playing. So I've decided, Keith Jarrett once gave a piano lesson to somebody, apparently. I can't imagine being Keith Jarrett's student. I think it would be horrendous. Brilliant though he is. Hi Charlie. Hello. Yeah. Brilliant though Keith Jarrett is. I don't imagine he'd be a great teacher, but his first lesson was to get somebody to play a perfect fifth, which sounds like that. If you've ever heard bagpipes, or actually some hoovers sound like that. Some hoovers have a perfect fifth kind of sound because it's something that occurs in nature. And I don't know enough about the science, except that when you play a string and you put your finger on it a certain way up, you can hear that fifth in the sound as well. So a lot of music uses that sound. So I'm just going to start with that and improvise with it. Here we go. So, maybe a couple of months ago, I might have got to that point and gone into Smoke on the Water or something. Could have done. They use it as a drone. This is the same thing. And yeah, I'm kind of trying to figure out what I'm doing, whether it's free or not. Is it free? So some people would say that that's free improvised music because there's no tune. But actually, I did try and do a tune at the beginning. I tried to. I played like a couple of phrases which could have been a tune, and if they'd have been written down, I could have played them again at the end, and then it would have been jazz, I suppose. But because the tune didn't come at the end, and because while I was doing it at the time, I couldn't really hear, I couldn't remember exactly what I played. So it was nearly a tune. It was the hint of a tune. Sometimes jazz musicians, when they're playing to an audience that know the music, they'll start playing a famous tune, and then instead of playing the whole tune so that everybody knows what's happening, they'll say, okay, let's assume the audience knows what's happening. I'll play the first couple of phrases. They will know what the tune is then, so then I can go off and start improvising. And actually, when you listen to jazz and you try and find what the original tunes are, it can be very difficult to get the notes right, because jazz musicians don't play it straight. You know, they don't play it note for note. So there were certain things that were free about that, but then the fact that I had that sound kind of underpinning it, it eventually broke down a bit, but I kept coming back to it. So that kind of gave it for me a certain kind of reference. It referred to a lot of music that I don't know much about, like Arabic music, which is a huge kind of labyrinthine world of stuff that when you don't know it, it all can sound very similar, but it's actually all incredibly different if you're a person involved in that music and if you're from that culture. So it gives it a kind of sound of that music, but without being kind of authentic, I suppose. So I've written a few things down here. I don't know if I'll talk about any of them or not. One of the things that I think about quite a lot in playing music is how things from nature inspire music. So sometimes people are inspired by nature. Composers would have, in the 19th century, for instance, might have been inspired by nature and written heroic themes, giving animals kind of human qualities, or giving things in the natural world, like Strauss wrote a thing called the Alpine Symphony, which was basically a great big long piece about someone climbing a mountain and coming down again, and it was kind of about conquering nature. So there's this big mountain and this person got up it, but the actual process of getting up a mountain is probably not, if you've ever actually done it, it's probably not quite like Strauss imagined it. There are big long bits where you're just tired and knackered and you might die, or you might. So the question of whether you look at nature directly or you get an idea of it and what the difference is. And one of the things that I noticed is that people people quite like listening to nature. People like listening to bird song, right? If you're ever up early enough, 5 o'clock in the morning, and you hear birds, I don't know anyone who hates bird song unless they don't want to wake up. But when you actually unpick it musically, it's like a cacophony. If there were musicians doing that outside your window, you might well hate it. But that actually is what a lot of free improvisers are kind of doing. They're trying to get to a sort of natural state where you're not thinking about the notes and the music. You're not thinking about that sound. You're just thinking about whatever sound you want. Yeah, giraffes can't dance, Charlie. That's right. I'm working over old material from my blog, but so one of the other things about improvised music is that people think that you just make it all up off the top of your head, and that's not true. You get like anything else, like learning a language, learning how to talk to people in another language. You get phrases together, and then you use them, and you get kind of little tricks. And one of the things that I started doing was trying to get the feeling of several different things happening at the same time, but trying to do it on the same instrument and with two hands. So just a simple idea that you can really hear clearly, like a note repeating. Now in nature, notes don't go like that. They don't go like that. Animals don't make that kind of noise. It's a lot less even. And it's also a lot less even in Brazilian music and Cuban music and African music. So it's just the idea of something repeating, like a woodpecker, or like looking out of a window and the window's a branch is bashing against the window. You know, that old horror movie thing where somebody gets killed. Like that kind of thing. I wanted to do that. So I'm going to try and do it, and it's just like a textural thing. So, time to look at the comments. Brave the comments. Super brilliant. Thanks, Luca. I'm glad you're here. It's yeah, it's kind of funny coming back to doing these gigs after a while. But I'm basically doing this for two reasons. One is I haven't really had time to prepare a load of pop tunes and stuff, and also I feel like these kind of techniques, you know, there's the sort of drama college thing about be a tree and all that kind of stuff, but there's also a link to music and being a musician that is not that far away from how you learn music anyway in a conservatoire. Yeah, so that was kind of a kind of nature impersonation thing, but also there are other things in music that have that. I mean, if you listen to Bach preludes and fugues, or any kind of Baroque music, anything with counterpoint in it, Mozart, Beethoven, everything has some kind of counterpoint, and you hear something happen here and then something happens down here and comes in, and you think, oh, that's like that. And if you listen to birdsong, that's the same thing. You hear those correspondences going on. At some point, somebody who was a musician thought we should do it like that, I think. So it's trying to get back to nature, whatever that means. There are other. I'm just going to kind of go through a few different ways of doing things. So there's another thing that I like to do is to find a gesture or some kind of musical statement and then make it go out of shape. So when you listen to let's say Mozart, you have a frame of reference that is these kinds of chords. That kind of stuff. Part of you is listening to this. So every time somebody goes, you think, oh, that comes from that thing. But also part of you is thinking, I like that chord, I want it to go to that chord now. And so if you take one thing, if you take the theme and the idea and you take it out of the chords and just make it run wild kind of thing, I quite like that effect, that you establish a figure or an idea that people get used to, and then you can move it wherever you want, and hopefully people go with you. So for this I might start with a tune, alarmingly enough, just to break it down, because this is how you would take one of the ways you can take a tune and then break the chains of it and then maybe put it back together. So yeah, I'm going to do Take the A Train by Duke Ellington. Why not? It's the first thing that comes into my mind. so that wasn't particularly free. It was trying to break out, I suppose, trying to break out of a structure, I think, rather than actually being free. But that over time, the thing that you go back to and say, this is my idea, this is what I'm going to go with, that goes from being the tune to being just something you got out of the tune. So you could just like become something else. And I suppose that's where I found myself working a lot, is the gaps in between a sort of orthodox jazz improvisation and completely free improvisation. Both of those things I really like doing as well. Lorenzo, when he understands it's you, cries, "Oh dear. You sure it's not the music?" You see, you should try, Eleanor, you should try an experiment. You should turn the video off and leave the music on. See what is causing the crying. You know, you've got to use a kind of empirical mindset about how you test these things. I would try it with the sound off. You might shut up. So, yeah. Something else that I did when I used to work with John Stevens, who's one of his albums is over here. And I once did a free improvised session with him and Maggie Nichols and Gail Brand, and we were playing, just improvising on one note. We'd pick one note and everybody would just play versions of that note until we got to another note, and then you move one up and then you start improvising on that, and it became this little kind of drama of what happens when you go from C. If you spend enough time on C and you go up another semitone, it becomes quite a moment, because nothing else, there aren't any other moments to look at, so it becomes like looking at something under the microscope. So you're playing a sound, and you're looking at all the different ways you can play C, and then suddenly somebody plays a C sharp, then it's quite weird. And it reminds me of another story. I hope this video, it looks looks like I'm some kind of aging musician reminiscing about things that I did when I was working, which I suppose all musicians are doing at the moment. So a very famous British jazz pianist, who shall remain unnamed, was playing a jam session with free improvising musicians, and it was like 5 or 6 other musicians, and this guy is primarily somebody that plays tunes. So they had this blowing session. He turned up and everybody started improvising completely all over the place, and he started playing the national anthem, the British national anthem, and nothing changed. Everybody carried on playing exactly what they were playing. And when I first heard this story, I thought, now, I was younger. I was probably in my early 20s when I first heard this story, and I thought, oh yeah, that's typical. Free improvising musicians just play loads and loads of notes, and it's all very macho and posturing and making a lot of noise, and nobody really listens. They're just all expressing themselves. And when somebody does something that makes you listen, you don't change anything. So this was my view in my early 20s. I think about 10 years later, somebody else told me the same story, and I remembered hearing it. But by then I thought, actually, if you're playing in a situation where everybody has a certain approach to sound and they're kind of generating one thing together, and then you play the national anthem through it, it's kind of like the moustache on the Mona Lisa thing, really. I mean, regardless of which you judge as the Mona Lisa, whether it's the national anthem or who is the moustache and who is the Mona Lisa, this is the question. What was I going to say? I can always edit this out when I put it on YouTube. Yeah, and I thought actually that's quite a sort of childish thing to play the national anthem, which you regard as a silly piece of music, especially in that scenario, and expect people to listen and to do something that you yourself are doing when there's this other collective thing going on that is different. So again, that's a thing about how you listen, what you're listening for. When you listen to a Mozart symphony, you're expecting something. You're expecting to hear the beginning the same but the other way round. When Beethoven wrote symphonies, he put in key changes that were almost seen as blasphemous, and he was still writing symphonies. It was still the beginning, and then the end is the beginning but the other way round. But just doing the wrong key changes was horrendous because people weren't expecting it. So after that long diatribe, what I wanted to do is just try and play something almost nothing and add as little as I can to it as slowly as possible. I promise it won't take too long. So that, I think what I was doing there was starting with one idea and then getting completely distracted by my memory of the national anthem, and sort of worked it in just to see if it would work, which I don't know. Depends if you could hear that it was there. Music also, you can see it as a kind of system of building blocks of intervals, and most music that people like is built on the interval of a third. Hymns, pop songs. The 3-chord pop song is based on 3 chords that are all based on groups of thirds. And it's a very kind of familiar arrangement. But if you change that and you say, okay, I'm going to base it on fourths, so fourths sound very different. Thirds give you a sense of place. Take the A train, national anthem, and all the rest. Fourths, that's a very kind of different sound. Kind of doesn't really, it's ambivalent, it doesn't really go anywhere, it's non-committal, and it gives music this kind of plasticky sort of quality, which free improvisers love, because it means you can move things around any way you want. You don't have to make things fit in the right key or any of this kind of stuff. So if you put two fourths together, when you put this one down here, you get a fourth and a second. And a second is quite clashy. If you take that note and put it to another C, you get a ninth, and a ninth is also quite clashy. And one musician who I really love and who's much hated by a lot of people is Cecil Taylor, and he makes very, very uncompromising music a lot of the time, but it's very precise, and I love the precision of it. And I must admit, I have no idea what he's doing, but it made me think about using these kind of structures and to think of music like a building, as if like Lego bricks, as if you're actually building something. I guess it's like castles in the sand kind of metaphor, because you're building something that then goes and is kind of half remembered or not at all. So you're building this stuff up as it keeps coming down, but it's very exciting to do it, and I find it exciting to listen to. So in order to hear these sounds really clearly, it's good to make it very dissonant so that they don't join up harmonically, so you don't get nice sounding chords. If you did it like that, it might sound too much like you're going back into the Arab territory, whereas doing that, you very much hear the sounds without all the references to all that tonal music. So I'm going to try and play a bit of that kind of stuff. yeah, that's the kind of sound. And the other thing that is very useful about that, and that I noticed while I was playing, is that it's very close to a kind of rhythmic sound that for me reminds me of a kind of African sound. I don't want to be more specific than that, but a kind of groove. You can build grooves out of these things because they're like sound. They're just like drum sounds. So, I mean, I remember doing this when one of these gigs when I was playing Hyperactive, the Thomas Dolby tune, and that lends itself to that kind of rhythmic thing, where I felt like, okay, it would be nice if I was just playing drums and then I could play a drum intro. I wouldn't have to worry about notes. But with this kind of sound, you can. So it gets close to a pulse. So instead of being random, I'll try and start random and go into a pulse. So. Into a thing where you can play a tune. So you kind of mix a drum sound in with the piano. I mean, I've been trying to make the piano sound like the drums for years. Just because I've never had a really good piano. No, that's not true. I did have a really good piano for a while, but mostly I play pianos that aren't that good, and so they lend themselves to being played like the drums, i.e. not making much of a notey kind of sound. So I think what I'm going to do, just to finish, I think I might try and finish at 5 today, since I haven't got loads of stuff and loads of songs that I've got to get through. I'm just going to improvise and do one long piece. If anybody's got any questions or problems, do let me know. Right. Thanks. So, I'm going to I think I'm going to do these gigs kind of once every 2 weeks now, to give myself a bit of a chance to get some material together and come up with some other themes. But at the moment it's a bit difficult doing it once every week, so I'm thinking once every 2 weeks might be doable. So, hope you enjoyed it. Hope it wasn't too much of a lecture. About halfway through I felt like I was kind of pitching some kind of GCSE free improvisation shtick, which would be great actually. They should do it. I think everybody would be a lot happier. There's one thing that I forgot to mention, is that even if you don't like listening to it, it's bloody good fun doing it. And I shouldn't say that really. So thank you all for coming. Sorry, Lorenzo, for making you cry again. And hopefully see you in 2 weeks, whenever that is. I haven't even checked my diary, so but hopefully see you then. So thanks all for coming, and hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back to the hits of Black Lace in 2 weeks time. Alright, thanks a lot. I can't see how to get out. How do you get out of here?